For Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's my honor this evening to take up a question I originally asked the Prime Minister on the subject of the Paris Accord on climate change, and I asked him if he was planning to attend the April 22nd United Nations meeting at which the Paris Accord would be open for signing. But the second part of my question, which is still relevant, is whether we would be presenting at that occasion more robust targets. It's entirely my pleasure to report that, of course, the Prime Minister did personally attend at the United Nations General Assembly. It was a record breaker for the United Nations system that on the first day open for official signing of a treaty, for the first time ever, more than 174 countries signed on one day. And it was wonderful that our Prime Minister and our Minister for Environment and Climate Change were both present. To give it context, there are 195 countries that have confirmed that they will be signing. So every country on earth is committed to this agreement. Now, a lot of people watching these debates may wonder, what does the Paris Accord accomplish? And this is what I want to focus upon in the time remaining. It's either an agreement that's an enormous success or it's a sham. And I believe it will be an enormous success. But in order to succeed in achieving the long-term target, which is to ensure that global average temperatures do not exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius, what they were before the industrialized revolution, in order to achieve that, we need to have very robust action plans from every government. As Secretary General of the United Nations said on that occasion of the signing ceremony in the UN General Assembly headquarters, he said, the window of opportunity to avoid 1.5 degrees is closing very rapidly. Now, crunching the numbers as scientists do, you look at all of the targets, they're now referred to as intended nationally determined contributions. You take the aggregate of all of those targets, assume every country is going to meet its target. What is the impact? Do we avoid 1.5 degrees? Do we hold it to less than 2? And the horrible truth is the range of global average temperature increase takes us well past the danger zone and potentially into the area that scientists don't want to talk about, of runaway global warming, where the amount of anthropogenic warming triggers a non-stop warming effect globally. Planetary disaster, catastrophic impacts will ensue. The range, if every country achieves its targets, is 2.7 to 3.5 degrees Celsius global average temperature increase. Now, in this currently, Canada's INDC is that left behind by the previous government, which is why I raised this with the Prime Minister and raise it again tonight with the Parliamentary Secretary. It's quite clear that Canada showed leadership at COP21 in Paris. Canada again showed leadership in signing on the opening day and on the Prime Minister's rather prominent role in that signing ceremony. Now we have to show leadership by withdrawing the INDC that's currently tabled, left by the previous government, of 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. It is far weaker than that of our U.S. partners. The Barack Obama administration has an end date of 2025. It's my absolute contention, assertion, and in fact, I'm begging the government to change our target to coincide with that of the U.S., at least advance it to close by 2025. Then, as the Paris Agreement goes through global stock-taking, we'll be reviewed in concert with the U.S.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much to the honourable member for the question. I'd like to start by acknowledging the party leaders, the provincial leaders and territorial leaders, Indigenous leaders and members of Canadian civil society who came together from across the country and participated constructively in the negotiations at Paris just a few short months ago. Our government very intentionally adopted an inclusive approach to these important negotiations in order to send a clear message to the international community. One, that Canada takes the threat of climate change very seriously, and two, that climate change should very much be a non-partisan issue. As the honourable member, I too am very proud of the leadership role that Canada, its Prime Minister, its Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and its entire delegation played at Paris. Maintaining the momentum established in Paris has and will continue to be very important. A key first step in this regard will be to ensure that the Paris Agreement is brought into force as soon as possible. As the member opposite is aware, the Prime Minister, and as she acknowledged, the Prime Minister signed the Paris Agreement on behalf of Canada at the UN headquarters in New York on April the 22nd. Domestically, what is most important is how now Canada works to develop and implement specific policies to address greenhouse gas emissions and clean growth. This government takes the commitments made in Paris very, very seriously. We are presently working on a detailed strategy that will enable us to ensure that we meet or exceed our currently stated target. Given the decade of complete inaction on climate change that we experienced under the previous government, Canada has made virtually no progress over the past decade with regard to addressing greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, if one looks at Canada's projected emissions profile in 2030, taking into account actions taken at the provincial and municipal levels to date, we are projected to have emissions of approximately 9% above 2005 levels by 2030 versus the current target of 30% below. Given the lack of progress in the 10 years since the previous Conservative government established the 30% below 2005 target, this target now represents a highly ambitious goal. In terms of a climate plan for Canada, as the honourable member is aware, the Prime Minister met with the premiers in the provinces and territories to discuss climate change and what Canada must do to achieve its targets. The Vancouver Declaration established a framework for the development of a detailed plan as to how Canada will begin the transition to a stronger, more resilient, low-carbon economy. As First Ministers agreed at that time, we will promote clean and innovative economic growth that creates jobs for Canadians, we will ensure that carbon pricing exists, and we will invest in both adaptation and mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. First Ministers will meet this fall to finalize that plan. We've also taken action with the Americans on a number of fronts, specifically with respect to reducing methane emissions to 40% below 2012 levels by 2025. Canadians recognize the enormous strides that have been taken in this file over the past number of years. In my mind, we have a moral imperative to get this right for our children and our grandchildren. We also have an economic imperative to get this right to ensure a strong and robust Canadian economy continues to thrive as we move towards a lower carbon future. I'm proud to be part of a government that is demonstrating strong leadership globally and domestically. I'm also pleased to be part of a government that is desirous of engaging Canadians of all political stripes in this important conversation. I know that the honourable member opposite cares deeply about this issue, as do I, and that she has many thoughtful things to say regarding these issues, and I look forward to working with her to ensure that we are collectively successful on this important file.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And of course, I don't disagree with a single thing that the Parliamentary Secretary has said about the last 10 years. In fact, I'll go farther and say that in 2005, the previous government of the Right Honourable Paul Martin had in place a plan that would have taken us very close to Kyoto targets. It was immediately cancelled by the previous Prime Minister when he took office. But that's still not good enough. It's not going to be enough for the new Liberal government to be much, much better than the previous government. We actually have to do what's necessary. And what's necessary to avoid 1.5 degrees Celsius means not just drilling down domestically into how we almost meet or meet the target of the previous government. By withdrawing our INDC and tabling a new one that's more robust, that's more ambitious, we can trigger other countries to do the same. Otherwise, we will lock in global average temperature increases way past the danger zone.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I certainly commend the honourable member for her passion on this issue. I certainly feel very strongly, in the same way that she does, that we need to take strong action to address climate change. You know, in the context of the Canadian Federation, part of what we actually have to do is work collaboratively with the provinces who hold many of the key metrics and the key tools with which we actually can get at some of the key sources of emissions. And so the process that we established as part of the Vancouver Declaration is to work collaboratively with the provinces to work towards an outcome that we will all be happy with. And as I said when I was speaking a few minutes ago, the focus for us is on meeting or exceeding those targets, and we're working on a collaborative basis with the provinces to ensure that on a pan-Canadian basis that we have a plan to do that.